Yes, come on through. That is the voice of Rosetta Tharpe's sister, Rosetta Tharpe, born Rosetta Atkins, or Rosetta Newbin in Cotton Plant, Arkansas on this day in 1915. There's probably no Little Richard, probably no Johnny Cash, no Chuck Berry, no Elvis, definitely no Jerry Lee Lewis without this woman. And so we are always going to pay homage and honor those that came before. Pass that baton, y'all. 866-801-8255. I'm so grateful to this man because I reached out to him after watching the CBS Sunday morning piece on Eatonville's going away. And I was like, an architect who's a historian as well and who studied all, I need to have him on. And he was like, I'm busy. But he made room for us today. So I'm so grateful. Let me welcome the great Everett Fly to the Karen Hunter Show. Hello.
Hi, thanks, Karen, for having me.
Thank you for coming in. Very, very humble you are. The work that you do, though, is so super important. Let's start with Eatonville, which is near and dear to my heart because I lived in Orange County for a minute. Been to the Zora Neale Hurston Festival. She is a hero of mine. The documentary on her this year is amazing.
Right.
And the fact when I saw this, I grabbed my chest like Eatonville's going away. So tell us what is happening right now.
Well, there have been a series of threats over the years to Eatonville. Immediately, what's happening is the Orange County School Board is planning to sell the last, I believe it's about the last 100 acres of what was the Robert Hungerford Industrial School. And if you know Eatonville, as you described, that 100 acres is a significant chunk of the original 350, 400 acres that forms the original town proper of Eatonville. So you're talking about selling a third of the land in the town for an outside developer.
As the story goes, Black people really couldn't own land, but land was the only way that you could vote because this country is really based upon wealthy landowners or landowners, period, having a say in what happens. So the two people that came together to form Eatonville went to white folk who bought the parcels and then sold it to them.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Now this seems to be a common theme, like somebody getting white people to participate in democratizing the country. How prevalent was this?
Well, Karen, this was unfortunately pretty common because, when you think about enslaved people, coming out of, where they came from, they little or no money, all the political connections that are required for, land acquisition and certainly political connections required to govern, actually govern a town or community. And as I said in the CBS piece in the short segment, the racism was so strong that there were lots of white people that realized they understood if Black folks get land, as I said, then they'll have access to the right to vote. They'll have access to the right to, govern themselves. They won't be under our thumb, like they were. And what do we do? Because we need this workforce. Back in that time, we need this workforce. We need, folks that are, we can order around and have them do what we need to, done and, continue to dominate.
August 15th, 1887, Eatonville, named for Josiah C. Eaton, who was one of the landowners that was willing to sell to Black people after being encouraged, became one of the first self-governing all Black municipalities. It had a post office that opened in 1889. It had schools. It had its own police force. It had businesses. It had a club that back in the day opened its doors to B.B. King, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, James Brown, all came through the Platters and performed there. It was the birthplace of, as I mentioned, Zora Neale Hurston. What is it now? And I think about that the way I think about so many of our communities, whether we're talking about Mound Bayou in Mississippi, which they built a highway through, to decimate that town, to even places like Rosewood, which, domestic terrorism, and Greenwood, domestic terrorism. We think about these places that people who built this country came together to build their own community, not bothering y'all, not bothering anybody, just want to be left alone, and still can't be left alone. What was the cause of the decimation of Eatonville?
Well, it's a complicated story, but I want to go back. You laid the groundwork very well. Immediately after the town was established in 1887, the residents began to look for ways that they could build their own churches and establish their own congregations. They also began to look for ways that they could educate themselves. And so they got in contact, and this is documented, they got in contact with Dr. Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And in 1897, Dr. Washington sent two of his graduates, Russell and Mary Cunningham, directly from Tuskegee to Eatonville. And they established in 1897 the Robert Hungerford Industrial School. And as you mentioned, Mr. Hungerford was a white man. He donated the initial about 50 acres, I think it was, tract for the school. But the Black residents, this is the key point, the Black residents from that point, they began to raise the rest of the money for what became a 300-acre complex modeled directly after Tuskegee. So they built their own buildings. They built a sawmill. They built a blacksmith shop. Self-sustaining, and kind of that legacy is what continues today. But the school grew. Today we would call it a charter school, but it was funded by the residents of Eatonville. They would volunteer to help the students build the buildings, help the students raise the crops, and the principal, Russell Cunningham, used the idea again of agricultural economics. Among the first crops that he grew were sweet potatoes. And believe it or not, he grew enough sweet potatoes to begin to sell to the surrounding communities. And then right after that, they began to grow sugarcane. And if you go to Eatonville today and drive around in the community, you can see the residents call them patches. But you and I would say, man, the whole yard is cane. But there's the lots are big enough in Eatonville that it in proportion size, it just takes up a small part. But Russell Calhoun developed a business making syrup out of that cane, and they sold the syrup to the neighboring resorts where the white folks were coming, to get out of the winter. They needed to sweeten their drinks or sweeten their cakes and pies. And back then they used cane syrup. And so Eatonville had the sawmill, and they had the syrup mill that was a commercial operation. And then they also, you're talking about Florida, they also had their own citrus groves. And many people don't realize that, but I believe they showed the photograph yesterday of Joe Clark in his pineapple grove. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was part of the legacy of the community. And so they built this self-sustaining community, based on that. But of course, they still, hired out to do, different jobs. But they had those trades, the milling and the blacksmithing and so forth, along with, the domestic trades that, we associate with African Americans. They were maids and cooks and chauffeurs and all of that kind of thing as well.
So it went from, industries change, we're still arguing we shouldn't be over coal going away, because things should go away when technology, shows you that there's a better way, a healthier way that doesn't impact the environment or people's lungs. So as industries grow, I guess the community didn't keep up, or was it something more nefarious?
Well, all of the black towns, not just Eatonville. You mentioned Mound Bayou, um, the Oklahoma towns, Allensworth, California. They all had trouble with, today we would call it infrastructure, getting water, getting utilities, getting transportation. And many people don't know the streets were not paved in Eatonville until the 1960s. So think about that, a community that was settled in 1887, and they're paying taxes, of course, on their land, just like the other folks are. But the county government can't pave their roads. And so the roads didn't get paved, for example, until the mid 60s. Other infrastructure improvements didn't come. They had problems, challenges getting, you saw again yesterday in the CBS report, commercial interests. I started going to Eatonville 30 years ago, and there was no grocery store chain, there was no drugstore chain, et cetera. They had to go somewhere else to get services and goods. And then in the 1970s, the highway department came through and it built Interstate 4 and extended from Orlando to Daytona. And that extension of Interstate 4 cut the town in half. So when you go to Eatonville today, half of the town is on the east side of I-4 and half of the town is on the west side of I-4. And it wasn't until about 20 years or so ago that they really got an exit, getting off of I-4 so you could get to Eatonville. They used to have to get off at an exit and circle back. But now when you go to Orlando, there is an exit and it's marked and it has a sign that you could get off. So all of those challenges, how can you have a prosperous community? Again, if you can't get the transportation there, you can't get the goods and services, you can't get the business to invest in your community, because they undervalue you. They don't think you're worth it. And it's really a challenge. So it's pervasive across the United States.
866-801-8255. We're talking with Everett Fly. He is an architect by trade.